grasping the thin, almost translucent veil between that of fact and fiction, revealing mysteries of the past, folklore passed down from father to son, unsolved murders, and things that go bump in the night. You've entered Deceptive Reality.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Deceptive Reality Podcast. My name is Nick, and with me, as always, is the sagacious Bert.
Man, I don't even know how to feel about this one.
No, it's good. It's good. Yeah, it sounds bad, doesn't it?
It does not sound good, Nick.
No, you'll like this. It's having or showing an ability to understand difficult ideas and situations and make good decisions.
Oh, man, I don't know that people will agree with that one.
Well, from what you've been teasing about this episode, maybe I'll have to take that back. I don't know.
Listen, this one's a humdinger. Listen, everyone. I'm going to start this bad boy by saying, first off, I got the right t-shirt on. Not for what we're talking about today. Actually, I don't even know if I should. Listen, I'm going to show it anyhow. For those that can see it on the YouTube machine. I got my shirt.
Love it. Love it.
It's got the old Bigfoot and it says, believe on there. Listen, you got to believe. I actually saw a thing today, speaking of cryptids. They got another picture of the Loch Ness Monster, Nick.
Oh, yeah? Good one this time, or?
No, still not good.
These things must give off radiation or something, and it messes with cameras. It's got to be.
It's definitely one of those things that is questionable at best. I don't know where I sit on the whole Loch Ness Monster kind of deal, but I mean, listen, there's a lot of people that said they've seen something. So who am I to say they didn't?
Yeah, it could be anything. You know, we've got a lake monster on the way to Halifax in the city here.
Really? A lake monster?
Yeah, it hasn't moved during my whole lifetime. But what it is a wood carver carves a really realistic looking sea serpent and puts it in the lake. And every time it starts to decay, he carves it again and puts it out there. It's quite something.
That would actually be entertaining. That would actually be pretty entertaining to me, Nick. I'm not even going to lie. I'd be entertained.
I love it. Every time I'm going to the city, I'm like, oh, so it's like, well, how far are you now? And I'm like, well, I'm at the sea monster. And they're like, oh, okay, we know where you are.
As soon as you can put out there descriptors such as I'm at the sea monster.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone knows where that is. There's only so many sea monsters. That's
right. It's like those old timey maps that says like, oh, there's monsters over here in this part of the ocean.
That is true. Listen, we all have them. When I was growing up, it used to be go down to the corn silo and then turn left. And I was like, okay, anyone from Ohio will get that joke, but everyone else, sorry, it's not your day. It's not your day.
Well, if they don't know what a silo is, they can look that up.
That is true. Listen, big old thing, man, holds all kinds of stuff. In my case, corn, usually corn. So today, this one's mine, Nick. Listen, I'm just going to let y'all know up front. This is going to be a two-parter, and I'm going to explain to you why. And I know this at the beginning.
At least.
I know this one at the beginning, and here's the reason why. I've heard, this is my favorite. Listen, we joke about Bob Lazar all the time. That's Bert's boy. This is that. And that's what we do. But this is truly probably my favorite thing to look up because it's so intriguing to me. But when I watch other people do it, they leave so much of it out. And I feel like there's technically two mysteries in one on this.
Ooh, a double.
This is like a double. So at the end, we really have to answer two questions. But this one is, I've put everything of value in here that I think. Now, some of you, I know you're clicking on this because you can see the title. You know what it is before Nick does, which is fine.
Unfair.
He may say it's a little unfair, but for you, Nick, or anyone that just clicked the link without even looking at what, because they love our podcast so much. They're like, screw the title, man. I just want to hear what's going on. Do you want to hear?
I mean, that happens.
It does happen. I mean, some of it auto downloads and then they just listen as soon as they open up the thing. So they're like you, Nick. They don't know what's going on. Now they're looking at the title because they want to know right before you, Nick.
I'm looking. I can't see anything. So
man, it's tough.
Like you've teased this, and the more you say, the more confused I am. So the first mystery is what the heck is going on. Yeah, I'm so ready. I'm so ready.
This first one's going to tell you exactly what it is. And, if this doesn't get you going a little bit, I don't know what will. Let's stop talking about it. Let's be about it. Let's go.
In a land steeped in prophecy and turmoil, under a sky heavy with foreboding, a story unfolds that will echo through the ages. A man, hailed by many as a savior, condemned by others as a heretic, hangs upon a wooden cross. His body, weary from the trials of betrayal and suffering, is etched with pain. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows upon the ground, the man breathes his last. His followers, stricken with grief and disbelief, watch as his lifeless body is carefully taken down from the cross. In the embrace of twilight, they prepare his body for burial, wrapping it in a linen cloth. The dawn of the third day breaks with a hushed whisper of wonder. A group of women, their hearts laden with sorrow, approach the tomb. But what they find is not the solemn finality of death, but an empty sepulchre, the linen cloth lying alone. The man they mourned, gone. A mystery unfolds, leaving an imprint not just on the fabric but in the annals of history. This story, so deeply woven into the fabric of faith and skepticism, sets the stage for our journey today, a journey into one of history's most enigmatic and debated relics, the Shroud of Turin.
Never heard of it. I don't know what any of this is. The guy on the cross, I think that was a fella named Carl LeBlanc.
Listen, it could be. First and foremost, before we start anything,
okay,
I'm going to have some people that's going to complain about this, and I'm fine with it, but I'm going to put this disclaimer up front. This has nothing to do with religion. That's not what's in question today. I simply care about the Shroud of Turin. That's all I care about. That's what we're covering today. So if you're coming with the expectation of religious radio station 510, this is not going to be that podcast for you. Now, with that being said, you have to add a little bit of the religious element to understand what's depicted here. But we're not going to dive into it from a religious standpoint. So I put that disclaimer because I know if you've read the title, maybe that's why you're here and they're like, awesome, this is going to be a religious thing. It's not. I care about the Shroud of Turin in this specific story. That's a disclaimer.
Okay, I like that disclaimer. In the beginning, when it was first starting, before you get to the Shroud of Turin part, which I'm very interested in, by the way.
Yes.
I was getting a little nervous because I'm like, is Bert going to make me debate the existence of Jesus and all that kind of stuff? And like, is this going to be like agnostic doubter versus believer kind of thing? And I was like, oh no, I'm scared. I don't want to do that.
I would never do anything like that. First and foremost, for anyone that ever comes to our podcast, you have to understand, I'm a believer. Nick is agnostic. That being said, religion, we may have questions in and out of religion. I know there's questions sometimes I have for Nick as an agnostic versus me, who sometimes will have a point of view as a follower of Christianity, but it's simply from a curiosity standpoint. Our podcast is never going to take that tone into the other. And the reason for that is, regardless of which camp you're on, it's all speculation, theory, and a lot of faith, honestly. So that's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about unsolved mysteries. This is probably one of the greatest, in my opinions, unsolved mysteries, and no one ever does it right. And we are fixing that today.
Good. No, I'm fascinated by the Shroud of Turin, and I've watched a lot of documentaries about it and that kind of thing. And I'm sure we're going to cover it, but I feel like they're keeping such a tight grip on that it's hard to get any real answers sometimes. So I'm hoping that you've got a lot of stuff that's like, we know this for a fact, like they've let us examine it a little bit. So that's what I'm hoping to hear. But
here's how I've got things split up.
Okay.
Because I think to understand, you have to kind of understand where I'm at. I have 18 pages of notes that I'm going to be looking at. The narration alone with everything is about 32 minutes. I've got facts, and because this is so, what's the word I'm looking for? So
polarizing,
complex. It's very polarizing,
complex.
but it's very complex too, because there's a lot to it that part of it's speculation. If it's speculation right now, I've got the notes and I'm going to say this is speculation. We don't know that. Prime example. Okay. A fun fact, Shroud of Turin fact right off the get-go.
All right.
It's speculated, and the reason I say speculated is because scientists argue over this. When they did their initial findings of the shroud, when they were piecing it together, one of the interesting facts that makes this somewhat questionable from the standpoint of, was this Jesus of Nazareth's shroud? They found pollen and flower particles and imaging on it. So they found pollen on the shroud, and then like little pieces of what would have been flower fragments on the shroud that would have came from the Middle East.
Okay.
Which would fit.
I think I heard that it was from that time too, that they could tell that.
Again, that's speculation. There's scientists that says yes, and then there's scientists that goes bullspit. Bull hockey.
I like it.
Yes. Because they're doubters, which is fine. We need that. But the way I broke this down is the first thing that I do whenever I'm going to be honest, the way I create my podcast segments is I look at it from a me standpoint. I'm a historian first and foremost. That's where I get the most interest out of everything that I do. So we're going to take a walk of what was the first notable Shroud of Turin reference, and we're going to go through history to current, and then we're going to look at the actual shroud and each segment of the shroud of interest. Couldn't say that for a minute.
I can tell you're
super excited about this. I am. This is one of my favorite things, Nick. So that's what this is going to be all about. I know there's going to be a lot of questions. I'm going to try to answer them as best that I can. But we're going to look at different segments of the shroud. I also gave you in your Discord, Nick, pictures that will correspond. They're not numbered. You'll be able to look at them however you want to look at them as we're going through. But do you want to start with a little bit of history, where it all started, Nick?
Can I open my link now, or do I still got to wait?
You can. You can look at it anytime you want to, Nick.
I got a question before we get into this.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to get you for Christmas the actual Shroud of Turin, would you be mad or happy?
I would be scared to death. I think the wrong people going to try to steal it, Nick.
I was just saying, I got sticky fingers. I'll get this for you. I'll get it for you.
Let me tell you, I've always, and for anyone that doesn't know, it's not like it's always on display. It goes on display through certain periods of time. And it's fascinating, literally fascinating. Whenever they allow science to come in and actually look, and honestly, the way it was handled the first time when scientists came in, they didn't handle it correctly. And I think that's why they now kind of lean back and go, if you're gonna screw this up, it's not necessarily a question of whether it's legit or not. They don't want it destroyed more than what it is, because to them, it's invaluable.
Right. Like this is the truest artifact, kind of.
This, I would put this up with the Spear of Destiny.
Mm-hmm.
I would put this up with fragments of the cross. I mean, this, from a religious standpoint, if this were real, and I'm putting that out there, I'm not saying right now whether I think it's real or not. If this is real, it's big. This is super important. And as we go through, I'm literally giving you the depictions based in history and what's wrote there. But I'm gonna, as each segment comes in, I'm getting so excited on this, Nick. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, don't be sorry. I like it.
As we go
sell it
through
to
this,
me, Bert. Sell it to me.
Well, it's going to sell itself, I think, in a lot of different ways. You're going to be interested in a lot of this, especially when we get to the markings on the shroud, which I find completely like the history stuff is cool now, but like I want to get through that stuff to get to the meat and potatoes. But I know we can't. Like I'm looking at all these facts too. I got all these facts on the sides. Man, this is just such a good one. I'm super excited.
Yeah, we got to eat our dinner before we can have our dessert. Just keep that in mind.
And usually when I eat stuff, I eat my least favorite thing on my plate first. So that way the meal gets better.
I guess that's kind of what we're doing, isn't it? Like you're getting the stuff out of the way you don't want to do, and you're going to get to the. All right.
That is the goal.
Okay.
So are you ready to learn a little history now?
Yeah, I think I'm going to unlearn some stuff too, because I've heard a ton of speculation and I got to banish that from my mind.
Forget all the speculation because there's a lot of different speculations out there. What I'm giving you in this, with the exception of there's some things that I'm going to be honest. Each segment, when we get to this is what's on the shroud, I have to use biblical references. So I'm literally putting the biblical reference, and I'm even telling you where in the Bible to go and look. So in the narration, there's going to be a separate voice that's going to give you exactly, so you can, for yourself, go to, even if you have interlinear, go directly there and look at it word for word. Now, the translation I'm giving you is so everyone can understand. But that way we can look at that piece of the shroud and go, So you can kind of correspond. So
I'm going to have to go buy a Bible.
You can go online, Nick, for free.
I'm going to wear a trench coat and like one of those glasses with the mustache on it and stuff like that.
That's what it is. No, you're going to have to, Nick. They're going to be like, man, who is this?
They're going to kick me out of the egg. They're going to kick me out of the agnostic club. Actually, I'm right next to a church right now. I hope they don't hear me.
Oh man, they're going to be knocking on your door, Nick, going, "Hey, we heard you was interested in this right now."
Well, I heard you got the Shroud of Turin. Let's deal.
Well, the crazy thing about this story in history, if you pay really close attention, you're going to notice one thing about this shroud. And I know what your first question is going to be, more than likely within the next segment or the segment after that, because you're going to be like, why is X, Y, and Z? And I've already got that answer prepped in my mind.
Okay.
But
I know you're excited to listen to this, so I won't stop you anymore. Let's do some history.
In the midst of the 14th century, a period rife with turmoil and transformation, a small, unassuming town in France becomes the cradle of one of history's most mysterious relics. Dowry, 1353. This year marks the first recorded emergence of the Shroud of Turin in the annals of documented history. Enter Geoffroy de Charny, a knight renowned for his valor and devoutness. De Charny is engulfed in the tumultuous era of the 100 Years' War. Amidst battles and knightly endeavors, he emerges as the first known owner of the shroud. But how did this esteemed knight come into possession of such a relic? The tale is shrouded in mystery, with no clear records. Geoffroy de Charny, with intentions perhaps as mysterious as the cloth itself, chooses to display this mysterious linen in a small church in Dowry. The cloth, bearing the faint yet striking image of a man, front and back, resembling the wounds of crucifixion, immediately becomes a focal point of reverence and skepticism. The shroud, almost instantly, ignites a flame of curiosity and controversy. Pilgrims flock to Dowry, drawn by the allure of what some believe to be a genuine relic of Christ. However, not all are convinced. The local bishop, Pierre Darcis, voices skepticism, calling it a clever forgery. He petitions to the Avignon Pope, Clement VII, who delicately navigates between veneration and caution, acknowledging the shroud as an object of devotion while avoiding declaring it a genuine relic. Geoffroy de Charny's life, like the shroud he brought to public attention, is marked by mystery and legend. He meets his end in 1356 at the Battle of Poitiers, a fate befitting a knight of his stature. The shroud, however, continues its journey through history. It passes to his widow, Jeanne de Vergy, who continues to exhibit the cloth, adding to its legacy and mystique. In the heart of medieval France, in a small town named Dowry, the Shroud of Turin begins its documented journey, a journey marked by faith, skepticism, and the unquenchable human desire to touch the divine and the unknown.
All right. So, I don't know if this is the question you thought I'd have. Where did he get it?
So, as the narration said, is speculation. Now, I have a theory.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's speculated through multiple sources, but it's the one that seems to fit the best for me. So,
okay.
As everyone knows, and second off, Don, love you. Names are not your strong points, but it's fine. I'm Southern. I can't say some of these names either.
Yeah.
So it's all good.
Yeah, these are French names anyway. They're difficult.
So, as everyone knows, during this time frame, there was a ton of wars going on.
100 years of them, one might say.
Valid. What I believe happened is during a war, somebody had this shroud, and in typical fashions, it was not unknown for them to pillage and steal and take.
Mm-hmm.
He in the rankings, based on what I can find, was high level. So he would have kind of had first picks of everything within his company anyway.
Okay.
So that's the speculation. No one truly knows because he didn't
say.
He never said. But we know it was times of war, and that's what everyone's assuming is, unfortunately, he went to a town that had it, and he goes, this is now mine. It's not necessarily a good thing that he got it, is how I'm going to put it, because you and I, we talked about this, and this will obviously be out because for anyone that doesn't know, we're weeks ahead in our podcast right now. So by the time this comes out, the previous one, which was yours, would have been out, the part 1 and part 2. It's a 2-parter also. But we talked about Oak Island.
Mm-hmm.
And where this ties in a little bit is we talked about, you're probably going, how in the world does this tie in? We talked about at the end of that, and if you've not watched it, stop listening to what I'm saying, stop this one and go back and watch that one, because otherwise I'm going to tell you a big hypothesis we came to at the end. So nice me is giving you a disclaimer and saying, stop listening to this video. If you're across the room, I'm giving you 3 seconds to walk across and turn this off. Otherwise, you're about to find out the ending. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So our theory was at the end is there was something of so much value. Their goal was to make it never be able to get their hands on it. Right?
Right.
My theory is, because the question I thought you'd ask is, how is it that's only popping up in this time frame? Where was it for the other 1,300 years? And why is there no documentation of it?
Well, that's sort of part of the question I asked.
Yeah.
Because where did he get it? You know?
So the last account we had before that was the biblical account.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're at him. So there's 1,300 some years that went by. Much like Oak Island.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my tie-in. The worst thing you can ever do, which also goes back to your question of whether you could have it or not. The worst thing you ever want to do is tell someone you have something of this kind of significance, because now you become a target.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why also for Oak Island, we said more than likely they wanted to make this impossible to get your hands on.
Right.
Now, if this shroud is what it's supposed to be, this thing has so much. I mean, we're talking about, from their point of view, this is the blood of our Savior. I've got so many thoughts. He literally disappeared from this cloth, and this cloth would be by far to them more important than anything besides the gospel that he put out.
Well, this is like the last remnants of his physical form on earth, I guess you'd say, right?
Like, even if you think about, like, some people, when they go to a funeral, they'll take something from the funeral that marks that memory, whether it be,
right,
the program guide from when it all happened, or sometimes they'll take a flower from, so think about it. This is the last linen that his body would have been anointed in with essential oils. This would have been that last cloth.
Right.
This would be by far the most sacred. And the other thing you got to remember is, we're going to go a little bit religious here just because you won't understand the context if I don't. If you're the Romans, the worst thing that could ever come out, because you got to understand, according to religious belief, this was a predestined answer to what happened in the Old Testament, which back then there was only the Old Testament. This was prophecy. So the Romans would have wanted their hands on that shroud more than anybody else, because if they're like nowadays, if somebody does something wrong, the first thing they want to do is get rid of the proof.
Right. Right.
This is the proof in some regards, right? So the Romans would have wanted it for a completely different reason. The Jews would have wanted it. The true Jews, they didn't believe in the whole Christ thing, the Orthodox Jew, because again, this is a heretic. This is someone who is lying and prophesizing, and, this was a bad person. Get rid of anything. So this thing was a target from the very beginning. So I think they take the shroud and it disappears. Who knows where it went for that length of time?
Right. Intentionally so, I think is what you're saying.
Now, I think what happened is, when they're out, war times, they're pillaging, and they stumble across it and they go, oh, wait, what is this?
Mm-hmm. Why is this stored so carefully? Like,
correct.
Why is this hidden so well? Why is this like in a ornate sealed thing or something like that?
Correct.
Have you ever noticed how often this stuff resurfaces in France, of all places? Like, relics surface in France a lot, but I guess a lot of people who are pillaging end up there. Like,
correct. And if you look at art nowadays, it usually, when it's stolen, it usually ends up there also.
Oh, that is true. That is true. And they have no intention of returning it.
Zero interest. Now, a couple things that I will bring into account that we didn't really cover here, but I think they have some value, is once he got his hands on this, I think the assumption is that you can just look at the shroud and see the image of a man. That's not how this works. That's a big misconception. You can technically see the outline of what is a blood-stained depiction of what a man would be, but you don't see like features. Like, you don't see a lot of the feature part. The other thing that people don't understand is we didn't technically know what we had until way later. And we're going to cover that in a segment, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. So
yeah, you can see it from the pictures. Like, if you're just looking at the regular image of it, you might be tempted to say, oh, well, there was like some kind of painting of a person on it, kind of thing.
The easiest depiction I can do is if you look at the one that says, what is it, Dowry 2?
Yep.
That's the closest one that does not give a full depiction as much as what it would be. So it's not like you can see the blood stains, but you can't necessarily make out. Like you can tell it was a figure of something, but there's not a whole lot of shape to it.
Yeah.
So obviously this knight gets it. It's his. He brings it back. He understands it as a significant value, but I don't think he saw it from a good standpoint. So it's not like he's like, yes, I have the burial cloth or the shroud of Jesus. What he's thinking is, now I'm in a position of power.
You know, this is one thing I think, and again, speculation that I'd probably dispute.
Mm-hmm.
I think that wherever he found it, someone gave him some context on it, because if I'm looking at Durante 2 and I just found that laying somewhere, I'm really not going to think it's of any value at all. I think who he got it from, or someone in that area, gave him context of like, look, this is what this is.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind on that. Yeah, we don't argue that. Honestly, and I didn't want to say this necessarily on the podcast, but a lot of bad things happen when they would go in and pillage. Like, people did not typically survive this except for women and children. All the men were typically killed in these events.
Right.
So I'm assuming what happened is, and I don't know, there's no written record of this. But if
we can't know this part.
But based on other historical documents of what happened typically, my guess is someone came in, they did find this thing locked away in some capacity, and probably they tortured someone until they explained exactly what the value and significance was.
Right. Now that sounds more believable to me, because if you just found this,
oh yeah, no, they didn't.
You'd just be like, oh, I wonder what was resting on this dirty cloth.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, and you got to remember too, back in the day, they would have known that this was a burial shroud. They would have known that.
Right.
Because this was very common. This is not something that they just invented for Jesus. Like, this had been going on for a significant, since however long in history. I don't know how long they've been using shrouds, but typically what they would do, and a lot of people thinks it's like a mummy kind of wrap. It's not. So what would happen is they would take these bodies down. Most of them was put on these linens without anointing oil, or not anointing oil, but like an essential oil, anointing oils.
Right.
Because those were expensive. Anointing oils or essential oils back then would have been the equivalent of silver, bronze, gold. Like, it held so much value back then.
Right.
That stuff was given for, and this supposedly, right, we're not going to the religious part, but that was something that was given to Jesus when he died from another person, which, if you want to know that part, go back into biblical stuff. We're not going to get into that here, but they believe, when we look at the shroud, we talk about the pollens and stuff like that, that could have came from some of those essential oils. That's the assumption. Okay. That's speculation. Again, that's just what some of it comes from. But looking directly at the shroud, you could tell there's a body. The other thing is, the way the shroud typically was it was folded. So half would be the front of the body, the other half, and then it would be wrapped around. Right. It wasn't tightly wrapped, but you could actually have a body in there.
Yeah. And I guess if it was like anointed with oils and stuff like that, then it would sort of, I don't know, stick or contour to the shape of the body more, because it's, oils are kind of wettish.
Correct.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, there would have been something to it. And, typically the shroud wasn't anointed with oil, it was the body. But once it came into contact with the body, it would have obviously transferred, because it is a fabric. That's literally a fabric.
Yeah. So like if you were, I don't know, if you were washing your hands and someone placed a paper towel on you, or like a linen or something, it's just going to sort of stick to you.
Suck right to it. Yep.
Exactly.
Same thing. So he died because, again, he's still going to war. Like he
Right.
conquered this thing. They put on display. It ticked some people off.
Mm.
So people were coming there to look at the shroud out of curiosity, and there was people looking at it because they were straight ticked off.
Right. I imagine anyone not of his sect would be like, how dare you? Like,
Yes.
even claim to have this.
Because it's not like today, right? Like Christianity
Right.
today versus back then, there was a very small following. And I think that's where a lot of people try to think of today and they go, well, like, think of all that was not the, back then, that wasn't the
Right.
case. The vast majority is like, this is a heretic, clearly a liar. And that's, yeah. It wasn't necessarily a good thing in all of these occasions. The other thing that I kind of wanted to cover a little bit, and we're going to go into that a little bit more, the wife now gets her hands on the shroud. It was left to her.
Right. Right.
As the heir. And we're going to go into the story of where it goes from there next. Are you ready
Okay.
to hear that part?
Yeah, let's hear that part. Let's hear what the wife does.
As the story of the Shroud of Turin unfolds, it crosses paths with the influential House of Savoy, a lineage that would become its guardian for centuries. But how does this sacred relic move from the hands of Jean de Vergy into the realm of the Savoyards? This chapter in the Shroud's history, like many others, is veiled in the mists of time. The key to this transition lies in the intricate web of medieval alliances. In the year 1349, a strategic marriage unites the Charny and the Savoy families. Margaret de Charny, granddaughter of Geoffroy de Charny and Jean de Vergy, marries Humbert, the Count of La Roche and a member of the House of Savoy. This union, a blend of nobility and devotion, sets the stage for the Shroud's journey into the hands of the Savoys. Though records are not explicit, it is widely believed that the Shroud may have been part of Margaret's dowry. In the Middle Ages, dowries often included items of significant value and religious artifacts. The Shroud, with its growing reputation and sacred aura, would have been a prized addition, symbolizing both piety and prestige. Margaret de Charny, inheritor of her family's legacy, plays a crucial role in the Shroud's history. Her ownership and subsequent transfer to the House of Savoy mark a pivotal moment, as the Shroud transitions from a private relic to one under the stewardship of a powerful European dynasty. With this transfer, the Shroud ascends from a regional curiosity to a European marvel. The House of Savoy, known for their political acumen and influence, enhances the Shroud's prominence. It becomes not only a religious artifact but also a symbol of the house's power and divine favor. In the grand tapestry of medieval Europe, the Shroud of Turin weaves its way into the narrative of the powerful House of Savoy. As the Shroud changes hands within the House of Savoy, it travels across the tapestry of Europe, from France to Italy, weaving its way through the fabric of time and history, each relocation a testament to its enduring allure. Eventually, in 1578, the Shroud makes its way to Turin, Italy. Here, in the hands of the Savoy family, it finds a semblance of permanence. It's housed in the royal chapel of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, becoming a fixture of piety and intrigue. As it rests in Turin, the Shroud of Turin, a silent witness to centuries of change, continues to beckon the faithful, the curious, and the skeptical.
You know what strikes me about that part there?
What's that?
So back in those times, it was not easy to take good care of anything. Basically,
Right.
There's no plastic baggies they can put it in. There's no airtight containers, really, that kind of thing. So they must have been showing this some serious reverence. Like they knew what it was at.
You would definitely know back then, like I say, the values that we put on things now versus back then significantly different. Now, for most people that they may not know this, in which we're going to cover this a little bit in further in a few more segments, I think, but it's going to have a final resting spot. We call it the Shroud of Turin.
Right.
In Turin, where they kept this thing was in a box made of silver.
Oh, keep the vampires and werewolves out.
That too. Well, what properties does silver have that's of importance? Do you
like
know?
being sterile, or
Very sterile, but it does one other thing.
what's
It's
that?
along that line. Why is it so sterile?
Honestly, I don't know.
It helps kill off bacterium by default.
Okay. All right.
So if a bacteria will get on a silver will typically it'll kill whatever it is. That's why back in the old days people used to drink silver.
I think some people still do. Isn't
Yeah,
there
but it's
something
super
called
dangerous.
colloid? Yeah, it turns you blue.
It can, yes. If you drink too much of it, yes.
Yeah, what's it called? Colloidal silver or something like that people
Yes.
drink.
Have you had it before?
Oh no, I've not drank any metals that I am aware of.
I've tried it.
Have you?
Out of curiosity, I tried it. Yes.
Okay. What was the purpose and how did it taste?
I honestly, I found out you could, and I'm like, I kind of want to do that. I've never drank a precious metal before. Let me go ahead and do that.
Oh wait,
So I
lied. I've drank Goldschlager.
Mhm. See? Yeah, see?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I bought it was a very small, it wasn't very big. It's like this big.
Yeah.
But I was just curious, but it was infused with cinnamon and something else too. So it was like a double whammy, but it was supposed to kill off like all these bacteria and stuff. I'm like, well, heck, that's like a twofold. So, but yeah.
Have you seen that fella that drinks it all the time?
Yeah. He's like, he looks like a Smurf.
Yeah. Yeah.
With the white
no
beard
bacteria
and stuff.
near him. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, he looked crazy.
I would have felt somewhere along his journey, I'd be like, nah, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure once your skin starts turning a blue and you're like, I can't breathe. Or wait a second. No, I can breathe just fine. Why am I blue?
Yeah.
It probably would be like, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore.
Well, you think that, but then you got those people who like go in tanning booths all day, every day, and they turn into like crocodiles. They're like,
true.
No, this is normal. This is fine.
Yeah. Listen, hey, some people, they just have their own theories of how to get things done. That's on them. That's on them.
That's true. I mean, I've got my own superstitious theories and stuff about things to keep healthy and that kind of stuff that I'm sure make no sense. So I'm not going to criticize. I'm not going to criticize.
Me too. There's things that I do every single day that I guarantee if it does happen, though there is some things that I do and I'm like, that definitely has an effect. But you know, for the most part, we all have our little thing. The interesting thing I think about this segment, and it kind of gives off a little bit of the impression of what's really going on here. And this is why I wanted to bring these segments, these early history things, because it kind of shows the setup of what the mindset is of people. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's important.
It's big time important. Yeah. Because otherwise it could be just anything, anywhere. It doesn't matter. You show me something's history and I'll tell you what its future is. Right. So in this case, there was the marriage, and it's believed that was part of the dowry. Now that means it has value, significant value. And the value's not necessary. Again, there was money back then. I believe where the true power was was political power.
Right.
And then divine favor, because if you look at biblical references, everyone wanted to get their hands on the Ark of the Covenant. Why? Because it had divine power. This is of a God, and the power of God is now transferred to us. It's not really, it's like a warranty. Just because you get a car that had a warranty doesn't mean that you're allowed to have the warranty. It's kind of the same thing, but back then they didn't see it that way. Yeah.
Now, I mean, I guess I'll bring this up early. There's value and there's perceived value.
Yes.
Now, a really forward-thinking guy who, and I know that later on you're going to show me stuff that's going to make me say, oh, okay, this isn't right. But a forward-thinking guy who is looking for political power, good marriages for his daughters, set his family up in the future. Wouldn't it be nice if he had something that he could shape the perception of the value of it for future generations? Like,
Absolutely.
Maybe, and I'm not saying this is what it was, but maybe he fakes this shroud.
Could be.
He says, this is what it is. I've been in the Middle East murdering people. Like, this is totally believable. Look what I found. By the way, instead of giving you those 400 goats when I marry off my daughter, what about this Jesus cloth?
Well, he was dead.
Yeah. But I mean, he would assume that his family would continue, I'm sure.
He didn't want it. So what he wanted to do, so the original guy, forget his name already. Sorry, Frenchy name. What he did was he brought it back. I don't even know that he necessarily wanted to put it on display, but I think that was kind of what they did put on display. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So there was people that was coming in, but I don't necessarily think, based on what I saw, it's kind of like, how do I put this? Like, you ever watch sports teams when they steal something from the other team? They kind of put on display like, this is now ours.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what was like, hey, you need to do this. This is now ours. We hold the power. We have whatever this is. Now, when he died and the wife got it, now it becomes a dowry. And we're going forward just in this segment. We're going all the way to the 1500s. So this is 200 years from where we started. So it's like, this was my grandpa's grandpa's grandpa's. You know what I'm saying? So it's, I think at this stage,
I was just going to say, I'm playing devil's advocate because I know more of this story coming up that's going to totally discredit what I just said.
Sure.
But I want to say, like, if someone were forward thinking enough, this would be a great way to make sure your family goes down in history.
Oh yeah. Because there's literally, like, again, you're looking at the shroud. You have no clue what's there. You can see the imprint of a body, but you can't really make out what's particularly there. Like, you got to kind of understand what's there to truly take into account, hey, this has some type of relevance that will benefit us. So, again, no one now he could have been sitting at home when he came back and talking to all the people and be like, yeah, I killed this person right before they told me, blah, blah, blah. That's probably what happened. We don't know that, obviously, but that's more than likely what happened. Is he threatened someone to get the info, and then once he got it, he killed him off. That was not uncommon back then.
Yeah. Now why I say I know this is going to get discredited later, because I personally, from what I know, and maybe you'll tell me opposite later, from what I know, I don't feel like it would be possible for him to fake this, especially with the things that he doesn't even know that's in it right now, or he wouldn't have known.
Yes.
So, but I'm getting too far ahead.
I actually have a theory at the end of this that I've not heard but one other person talk about.
Okay.
And, there's actually a lot of things. Like, typically when people talk about the shroud, they talk about what I call the big hitters, which we're also going to cover. But there's a lot of little small things about the shroud that no one ever talks about. So, some of it I held out. If we're being honest, I probably held about half of it out, but we're going to talk about it off the narration. So we're going to cover it in the narration, the things that's tangible. We can prove it. Here's where it sits. And then we're going to talk about the rest of it off of the narration. Yeah.
Because if you've listened to any of our episodes, I surely don't mind speculation. Like, we do that and we make it clear it's our speculation, but I got no problem with speculation at all.
Yeah. I think the truth is always somewhere in the middle, right?
Right.
You've got two stories and truth somewhere in the middle. So the speculations that's out there, some of it's far-fetched, some of it's pretty close. Especially if you look at the entire story, because you sit back and you go, that kind of makes sense.
Right.
But yeah, so now the cloth is starting to make a little bit of a move.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready to hear? And this event is going to be an important event for future segments. Are you ready to hear the next relatively significant thing that happens?
Yeah, let's hear this part.
The year is 1578, a year that marks a defining moment in the journey of the Shroud of Turin. After centuries of travel, intrigue, and reverence, the Shroud finds a more permanent home, a sanctuary that would etch its name into the pages of history. Turin, Italy, a city that would become synonymous with this mysterious relic. The relocation of the Shroud to Turin is orchestrated by the Duke of Savoy, Emmanuel Philibert. His decision is motivated by a combination of piety, prestige, and practicality. Turin, the new capital of the Duchy of Savoy, is transforming into a major political and cultural center. The Duke, recognizing the significance of the Shroud, sees in it not just a sacred artifact, but a symbol of the divine right and power of his dynasty. Upon its arrival, the Shroud is housed in the royal chapel of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. Here, it is guarded with reverence, a treasure of the Church and the House of Savoy. With the Shroud's arrival, Turin's stature grows. Pilgrims, scholars, and the curious flock to the city, drawn by the mystique of the Shroud. Over the centuries, it witnesses and participates in religious ceremonies, processions, and moments of crisis, becoming an integral part of Turin's fabric. As the Shroud of Turin rests in the royal chapel, it continues its silent vigil.
So the reason that I say this part has significant importance is now it has a resting place. This is the spot that will now transcend the entire rest of the story. And I don't believe it will ever leave this destination.
I guess you'd have to change its name if it.
Yeah.
It is
For sure.
bizarre that it's called the Shroud of Turin, although it only, like, in the latter part of its history ended up there.
Yeah, because you got to figure this is 1570, whatever it is, right? That's when they truly break it down. Now, there's an event that occurs in 1532? 15 something. And we're going to cover that, I think, in the next segment. But there's like a major event that occurs that kind of breaks down the rest of it. But now the Shroud has a resting spot. Now, the importance, there's a lot of nerd talk there, and I apologize, I'm a history guy. If you're not into history, the important takeaway there is now the Shroud is being used for political gain, as what I call the emergency pick-me-up. So by that, we have this catastrophic event. Let's go to the Shroud and pray, because this has divine power. Even though it's never been proclaimed to be that, but that's the perceived thought process.
So they've still not come out and said this is what this is.
They have. They've known since the first guy took it over.
Yeah, but the church isn't claiming it yet, I guess. Is that...
They are saying it's a burial cloth of Christ. Is what they're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Because I know. Sorry, I know in the first segment you were saying like they weren't. They were saying it's a significant thing, but they weren't really claiming it was what he said it was at that time.
Well, he was, so he did say that.
But the church,
but everyone else was like, we don't know what this is. Now you got to remember, we're now 1500 years after Christ has died. The church is established now. So at this point, we've got multiple, I guess you could say, offshoots of Christianity at this point, but they all kind of dive into the same belief system.
Right.
So now it holds some power, right? It'd almost be like for all of you that aren't necessarily well-versed with biblical stories, it would almost be like if you ever remember the story of Moses when he goes to the Pharaoh and they're fighting, and there's magicians there and they all have these staffs and they turn into snakes, and then Moses takes his staff and slams it on the ground and then it turns into a serpent. then everyone wanted that staff because they're like,
Right.
that holds power. This isn't magic. He's legit doing it. We see him doing it. That would be the equivalent of this. They're seeing the importance and the value, and it fits with what they're seeing. But again, part of it's faith. Everything we talk about, regardless, is a faith-based. And the reason for that is they can't see the image that we see today. And a lot of you are like, how do they not see it? There's a specific thing that occurred that we saw the image in. So there's one thing that we do in the 1800s that allow us to see what we see now.
Right. And that's shown in a couple of these other thumbnails, I believe.
Yes.
As well, because you sort of got depth in there. You can tell this wasn't just a.
Well, we didn't have that
painting or
until the 1980s. So in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, in 2000s, we've kind of progressed. So from 18, whatever it is, we're going to cover it, but 18 something until 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, it was, hey, we got this image of a man, but we didn't understand the depth of it yet.
Right. Okay.
So we're getting through this nerd stuff to get to the meat and potatoes. And I know you guys, because I know you guys are like, this butthole said is a two-parter. He better get to something before we get to that second part.
Yeah, you're kind of obligated.
I am. Listen, I'm going to try to get us to a good part before we kill this segment off. At least one. Right. I can't guarantee a whole bunch of them, but I'm going to try to get you guys to one. With that said, there wasn't a whole lot in that segment that I think really holds a lot of value. The next segment is really big for the skeptical side that'll be coming up. Do you want to hear that part?
Yeah, but I'm going to keep stalling because I don't want to give him anything before the cut. I want to be mean. You're not going to learn anything before the cut.
Man,
no, just kidding.
Nick is vicious. He's savage on this, boys.
Someone tinkled in my cornflakes today, I guess.
Nick's taking that out on all you guys.
I'm taking it on you. No, I'm just kidding. Let's hear that. Let's hear the next bit.
The year 1532 witnesses a moment of crisis that threatens the very existence of the Shroud of Turin. In the early hours of December 4th, disaster strikes. A fire, fierce and unrelenting, ravages the Saint Chapelle in Chambéry, where the shroud is housed. The flames, as if seeking to claim the relic for themselves, engulf the chapel. In the midst of chaos and danger, the shroud faces its most perilous moment. The cloth, stored in a silver casket, is at risk of being consumed by the inferno. Brave souls, driven by faith and courage, rush to its rescue. In a desperate effort, they manage to save the shroud, but not without consequence. The intense heat of the fire warps the silver casket, searing and scorching the folded linen within. As the smoke clears, the extent of the damage is revealed. The shroud, though largely intact, bears the scars of its ordeal. A series of triangular burns and scorches mar its surface, and water used to douse the flames leaves its mark in the form of stains. These blemishes, however, do not diminish the shroud's enigma. Instead, they add to its storied tapestry. In the aftermath of the fire, the shroud becomes the focus of meticulous preservation efforts. A group of Poor Clare nuns, skilled in the art of textile repair, are entrusted with the delicate task of mending the damaged cloth. Their work is painstaking, a labor of love and reverence. They sew patches over the burn holes and reinforce the shroud, ensuring its survival for future generations. The fire of 1532, rather than signaling the end of the shroud's story, marks a new chapter in its history. The shroud's survival, almost miraculous in the face of such devastation, reinforces its mystique. It emerges not weakened, but with a new layer of history, a testament to the reverence and dedication it inspires.
I did not know this part.
Which part?
How it was in a fire and they saved it. And is this where we sort of get a little more definition in it from the damage?
No. So the reason we put this in there, and it's going to become a part of the skeptic segment that I added to this, they're going to end up doing testing on this shroud in the future.
Right.
So they put it in this silver box, which was the best protectant they had at the time.
Right.
So it prevented bacteria from getting on it. It killed off all of the viruses and stuff like that would have been killed off through this silver.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, and for anyone that doesn't know, silver has a burning point.
Yeah.
The fire was so intense that it started basically causing this silver to melt. We don't know how thick this box was, but it was so thick that only part of the shroud caught fire. So part of it caught fire. Now, if you look at it, and if you look at the pictures, Nick, and for anyone that doesn't know,
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the shroud, you're going to see spots in the shroud that looks darker than others. You're going to see burn holes, basically.
Right, right.
And a lot of people goes, why is it lines? It's because my guess is that shroud was folded in the box.
And the edges were touching
the box. Yes.
Yeah.
So if you look, they're almost perfect lines. And then at the edges, there's some burns.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the assumption. And again, I'm just looking at the photo that says Durante 2 or whatever that is.
You know what it reminds me of? When you were little and you folded a piece of paper and then you cut little triangles out of it and it come out these interesting patterns like snowflakes and stuff. I can totally see that the edge is burnt, causing where it was the corners of it where it was folded is what caused those patterns. You can totally see it now that I've heard that segment.
Now, to give you an idea, when this caught fire, it was so important to these people that they went back inside risking their lives to pull this out. And again, it's in a freaking silver box. The box is going to be hot.
Yeah, hopefully they had oven mitts or something.
I know, right? But they went in and risked their own lives to get this box out. That's how important this was to them.
Right.
My guess is out of fear, they doused it with water, which caused some of the staining.
Yeah. So
now,
I was just going to say, now they mentioned that some ladies repaired this. They patched it up. Did, and maybe you don't know this, did they only patch it to preserve it, or did they clean parts of it, or anything?
Here's
like
the thing.
that?
Is the Poor Clare nuns is who did it.
Right.
After this event, they go, we can't have this happen again.
Right.
So it basically started a whole new set of precautions, no differently than, and people goes, how in the world did they not think of this? Think about it. At one point we had nuclear fusion reactors, and we didn't have a lot of precautions put in place then. We didn't understand how dangerous it was. Same thing here. You got to think back then, very different day and age. So there was an attempt to correct some of the cloth, and because it was so sacred, they then wove in fabrics from their time, which would have been the 1532, I think. So in 1532, they patched the spots that were bad. Now with that, they also tried to preserve it differently. They tried to clean as much as they could, but again, it was 1532.
See, that's where I'm going to run into a problem. Them cleaning it would definitely contaminate and ruin or remove even some things that we could have tested better later on.
No, they only cleaned the sections that was sooted.
Okay, so they didn't do the rest.
They didn't throw it in a washing machine.
No.
They cleaned the spots that had been sooted.
Yeah, I was just concerned that there maybe was some smoke damage, and then they sort of like maybe just cleaned the whole top layer of it or something. But
it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that, but we don't know. We have no clue.
Right, because that could throw a wrench into it later.
From what do you mean?
Like, if that did happen, it could be what causes some of the contention in the tests in the future.
It absolutely, well, no, that's coming up, and there's going to be a lot of that contention.
Yeah.
And this will be part of that.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
we're going
that
to
would
cover
be my
that.
concern with that. Okay.
But you got to remember, whatever they discover in the future
Mm-hmm.
is going to be based on, like, time can only go forward. It can't go backwards.
Right.
So whatever they do now isn't going to change the results and make it older than what it appears. It's going to make it look newer than what it appears.
Right. Yeah, and that is my concern. Like how there could be conflicting results.
And there will be. There absolutely. We're going to cover that. 100%. We're going to cover that.
Okay.
But not necessarily from the cleaning, and you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Right, right.
Because I don't know how much of this you know, so I'm not going to dig too deep. I'm just going to let you go with your thought process for now.
Well, except on big things, I'm trying to ignore what I know because I don't know how much of it is credible.
Oh, for sure.
For example, earlier when I was like playing the devil's advocate and saying, "Oh, well, he could have faked this to gain political power." Well, I know due to the nature of what we find out about the Shroud later on, that's virtually impossible for him to have done at that time.
Oh yeah, no one knew the value of this thing. Like there was speculation, but these nuns came in. Their big thing was making sure that they had, at this point, preserved it the best that they could,
right,
with what they had at their hands. But again, we're talking about something that was supposedly in their mind the burial cloth of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So to them, back then, you don't mess with things like that. Like if you look at the Ark of the Covenant, you look at all of those things, they generally was like, nope, I'm going to do what I can do to get away with it. And then I'm not doing anything else.
Did you ever see the story of a poor cleaner lady who worked for the church and said, well, I should wash off this priceless painting of Jesus Christ a little bit. It's probably not been washed in a while. So she sort of wiped her cleaner onto it, and it just smeared his face into nothing. And instead of like owning up to it, she tried to paint it back on.
Oh my God. No, I've never heard this story.
I gotta find that for you later, just to parallel it to what they're doing here.
Like that's the part that kills me. It's like the people that does that. Like, I don't know how many times I've heard leave old things the way they were because that's where the value in it is. So if there's a patina, leave the patina there. Yeah,
it's a problem of education, is what it is. But that's what I can't get away from imagining in my head that they've got this thing and they're like, wow, this is something that belongs to Jesus. I got to keep it clean. And they're like scrubbing it in bubbles and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be, nowhere does it say that now. They could have, as far as I know.
As far as
I know, they could have. But I've never seen that. And I would have to assume because of this was actual nuns, they probably handled it very differently than, well, I would hope anyway, than just Joe Schmo down the street.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on the thoughts of the time.
That is true, because it's a different day and age.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's surprising. Things that are common sense to us might not have been to them, and vice versa.
Correct. Now, this next segment goes into how we figured out what was on the shroud. So we're getting into the newer age stuff. Are you ready for that, Nick?
Yeah, this is one of the big reveals you've promised.
Yes, this is one of the big ones. And then we've got like one or two more before we get to the miracles things. I promise to get you guys to at least to one of the interesting things, as I call it. I promise.
No, this is all interesting. I don't know what you're talking about.
It is, but I know that a lot of people's like, I want to know if the shroud is real.
Spoiler, yes. No, just kidding. No, you've got to have a movie in your head. Your imagination has got to be running with this, because I know I've got one.
And that's why the history is so important. If I just go straight to this is why I think the shroud has some importance, you you won't look at things the same way
Yeah.
as how I do because I know the entire story.
Yeah, you need context.
Correct. And that's what we're doing. We're just building context. I'm letting you see the lineage, the pitfalls, because the fire pitfall, that's a big one. And you're going to acknowledge that here real soon. But this one is the big one from the standpoint of now we understand what we kind of have, but we don't even know to the point we know today.
Okay.
Are you ready for that one, Nick?
Yeah, I'm excited for this one.
Here we go.
For centuries, the Shroud of Turin existed as a revered yet mysterious relic. Its faint sepia tones whispered of a deeper mystery, a story etched in its fibers. But it was not until the dawn of the photographic era that the true depth of its mystery was unveiled. In the year 1898, the shroud found itself under the lens of an Italian photographer, Secondo Pia. His intention was simple yet profound, to capture the image of this ancient cloth. But what his camera revealed was nothing short of astonishing. Upon developing the photographic negative, Pia unveiled a clearer, more detailed image, the distinct figure of a man marked by wounds and suffering. The revelation sent ripples through the religious and scientific communities. For the faithful, this was a miraculous confirmation of the shroud's authenticity, a photographic testament to the passion of Christ. Skeptics and scientists, meanwhile, were left baffled. The clarity and detail of the negative image raised questions. How could a medieval forgery possess such intricate detail? How could an artist from the 14th century create an image that only revealed its full depth in a photographic negative? This photographic revelation transformed the shroud from a revered artifact into an object of intense scrutiny and debate. The clearer image sparked renewed interest in its origins, its history, and the methods of its creation. Armed with this new perspective, scientists and researchers embarked on a quest to understand the shroud. The image, now visible in stunning detail, became the subject of numerous studies. From investigations into ancient linen's properties to the analysis of the image's formation, the shroud stood at the intersection of faith and science, its mystery deepening with each new discovery.
Now, is that how you knew the story, Nick?
See, that part I had known, and I find it fascinating that all it took was a photographic negative to really reveal so much about what's going on.
Now, the speculation is, and I left this out, he was doing the equivalent of a news article back then, and it was about this shroud, and it was basically this religious artifact that was there that was supposedly the burial cloth of Christ. You can kind of see what looks like bloodstains, and it has this tapestry of interesting facts. He was this is I forget what the year was, 1898, I think. Back then, different technology. You got a stick with a flash. You got a camera that's separate. Poof. It takes this photograph. He takes this photograph, has no clue what he has. You take that film and you have to develop it. They took him into the rooms, the dark rooms. He starts developing it. And as he's developing it, he looks at it and he goes, "What's this?" So he calls in some colleagues and says, "Hey, look at this." The speculation is they went back and looked because they didn't believe it was the same thing.
Right.
Now, film was so valuable back then, he's not going to fake that, but they couldn't understand what they were looking at because that's not what the shroud is that they saw.
Right. So they didn't really get the concept of that, I guess.
Correct. So they knew they had a picture of the shroud and they're like, how did we screw this up? The second thing was they're like, no one's going to believe this photo. So they go to do it again. And guess what happens the second time? Same thing
results.
Occurs.
Yep.
Now they kind of reveal, we have this photo of this man. And no one could figure, honestly, it even went as far as they thought they captured the ghost of a
Oh.
person because
really?
they thought it was a burial cloth. They got a picture of a ghost. But then when they looked at it, they go, no, this is there. We just can't see it.
Yeah.
And you could only really see it in the negative. You couldn't really see it in the photo. And that's how they figured out, wait, because we inverted this imagery to the negative, we can see this way better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at the pictures now, and you definitely can. Like night and day.
Yes. It's literally night and day.
Yeah.
So the significance occurred with that photo. And for me, I couldn't even imagine what went through their brains, because my guess is, even if they did believe, when they saw this, they're like, holy crap. And for those, it's like, it's just, some lunatics thinking they got some kind of burial cloth of Christ. Then they take this photo and they go, what in the heck is that?
The image titled CQ5 DAM, is that another closer up of the negative?
Yes. So this is an actual negative imagery. This, I believe, is the first photo ever captured.
Okay. Because this is the one I was looking at earlier, where I said you can see depth in it, because the lighter parts are like almost like a relief map. Like you can see that where the shroud would have made less contact is darker, where it made more contact it's lighter, where there was more liquid presence at the time it's very light.
Yes.
And then we've got the folds there where it was folded in the silver thing. But this shows such another, man, just I can kind of see from a superstitious point of view where they think, oh man, we're looking at a ghost, because it looks almost like someone laying on top of it instead of something that's imprinted in the cloth.
Correct. And that was one of the speculation stories that went around. There's no validation for that, but that's one of the stories that went around. They thought they captured a spirit, but they didn't know what it was they captured. They knew for sure, because if you look, and we'll put this photo up, it doesn't look normal.
No, it's man, it's like I don't think there could be any doubt that this was the imprint of a body. Now, I can't say whose body it was or anything like that, but I don't think there could be any doubt that this was draped over a body. Are there people who doubt that even?
Back then or now?
Now.
100%. There's people that believe it's not.
That it wasn't even draped over a body.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm not a scientist of that type, but I can't imagine that. To me, it looks like there definitely was draped over a body. I can't picture someone being that precise at those times.
Well, so a lot of the skeptics have a lot of theories on that, and we're going to cover those.
I'm going to poo-poo them all. No, just kidding. Just kidding. I'm not getting one over that easy, but I'm going to go so far as to say I believe that this was draped over a body at one time.
I have my own theories, but then again, I know the end results of everything. Pieced together. Again, even if you don't believe in any of this stuff, by the end of this, if I don't at least make you question your thought process, I haven't done my job here. And I think, like a good person going in as a prosecution in a courtroom, I'm going to give you all the facts. And these are the facts. I'm going to give you the speculations too. Forget my speculations. Go straight to the facts. And at the end, if you can't tell me, then I haven't done my job. That's how I look at this.
Well, you've got me halfway. I believe there was a body under this blanket. Or not blanket. I don't like that word for this. I believe there was a body under the shroud. What you need to prove to me next is it was a particular body.
Well, Coincidentally, everyone, I'm not going to do this to you. The next segment goes into the very first evidences of the shroud and where they believe it's Jesus's shrouds. So at least everyone's going to hear at least the first one. Are you ready for the first one, Nick?
I am ready.
As we gaze upon the Shroud of Turin, its fabric tells a tale of suffering and sacrifice. The image it bears, a man marred by wounds, echoes a narrative deeply ingrained in the Christian faith. Let's look at each one individually. In the Gospel of Matthew, a poignant moment in the Passion of Christ is captured with stark simplicity.
Matthew 27:29. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head.
This crown, twisted with thorns, becomes a symbol of mockery and suffering, a harsh contrast to the traditional regal crown. In the biblical narrative, the crown of thorns is not merely a tool of physical torture, it is imbued with symbolic weight. It represents the mockery of Jesus' claim to kingship, a cruel parody of a royal crown. This act by the soldiers is laden with irony and scorn as they hail him mockingly as King of the Jews. As we turn our gaze to the Shroud of Turin, the fabric seems to whisper echoes of this scriptural passage. The shroud displays markings around the head area, suggestive of wounds that could have been inflicted by such a crown. These markings are not random, they encircle the head, consistent with the description of a crown being placed upon it. The wounds indicated on the shroud are not shallow. They suggest a violent pressing of thorns into the scalp, likely causing significant bleeding. In the ancient world, thorns were a symbol of sin and fallenness. Thus, the crown of thorns has also been interpreted as a representation of Jesus taking upon himself the sins of humanity. The use of a crown of thorns in Roman times was unusual, which adds to the uniqueness of this aspect of the Passion narrative. The Romans were known for their cruel methods of torture, and the use of a crown of thorns fits within the context of their practice of humiliating those they deemed criminals. In the intertwining of the shroud's imagery with the biblical account, we find a powerful visual and historical echo of the gospel narrative. The crown of thorns, as depicted in the scriptures and reflected on the shroud, stands as a poignant symbol of suffering and sacrifice, a testament to a moment of profound significance in the Christian faith.
They only covered the one wound there, which is not the ones I get excited about. Oh, that sounds creepy. But
God dang, Nick.
I ain't going into it quite yet because I know we're getting there. But the other wounds, to me, their placement is somewhat indicative of people having an intimate knowledge with the times that we lost for quite a while and only recently rediscovered. So I'm sure you know where I'm going with that, but I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to get into it.
I do.
Let's talk crowns.
The reason that I started with this one is because when you look at the description depicted of Jesus, they placed these thorns. That was not what they did with the average person.
Right.
If the Romans killed you by crucifying you, this was not there. As far as I know, there's only been one case where this ever occurred. And the reason that it was done, and again, we're not going to go into a lot of the religious stuff, but this has narrative. The reason that this crown of thorns, and a key word is crown of thorns, was put on his head was because he was considered a god. And what Pilate, or the equivalent of, not Pilate, but the equivalent of those that was his henchmen, put out is, well, if you're a god, you need a crown. And the Romans were known for torture. When you look at all the different ways of being tortured, I would put them top 5 at making people suffer.
Right.
Their goal was to make you regret whatever decisions you made. Now, because he was considered a god and kingship, they placed these thorns. Now, have you ever looked at the thorns that was depicted, Nick?
They're quite long, spiky thorns, I believe. Not what I see around here as thorns.
Yeah, because most people depict like thorns from a rose bush. Is I
Yeah.
think what most people depict.
Yeah, these are big spiny
These were
fellas.
they're more like needles, is what I'd call them.
Mm.
Very thick needles. In fact, the name of them, and I have it here in my notes. There's a very scientific name. I'm not going to call them that, but they're called Jerusalem thorns.
Right.
If you look up Jerusalem thorns, that's what they are. So they crafted this crown,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't put it on his head. Like some people think they just put it on his head. They pushed it onto his head.
Right.
Now, the reason that I call this one as significant as the other ones, there's no other noted case where anyone had ever had that occur. Secondly, if you look at the photos, there was one that had a pretty good picture of the face. Actually, if you go to the one that's the negative,
Yeah.
if you look, the face is so dark. The reason that it's so dark is it means that there was so much stainage there that is why it's so dark.
Right.
As anyone knows, if you've ever had a wound to the face, it bleeds profusely. Now, not to get too graphic, but you have to understand there's not a lot of there's a very thin layer of skin between your head and your skull. There's not a whole lot there. So think about 20 or 30 of these getting rammed onto your head and how much blood that would be.
Now, in my younger days, before I knew about the different thorn bushes that were there, as opposed to what's here, and I saw the Shroud of Turin, I thought, well, man, I don't know if that depiction of the blood on the head would be accurate. But knowing now that species of thorn bush, that's way more realistic.
And when you look at the shroud, speculation. We're going speculation with this. The blood pools that pulled up in this shroud is significant at the head. Significant. Like there's pools of blood. There's not anyone that knows once you die, you still bleed, but not as powerfully as it would be. That means that there was already so much blood in that area that when they would have put whoever this was on the shroud, there was so much blood it just soaked it right up. If that's truly what this is.
Right.
I don't want to lead anyone down any paths. But if that's, and again, we're talking about a story where no one else in history has ever had that kind of a marking. But we have one account where it occurred.
Right. And now it's possible that they've done it to other people before, but I don't know if there'd be that kind of reason for it as strong as would be in that story.
Well, think about it though. They didn't have Amazon. They would have had to have created this.
Yeah.
Think about trying to make that crown of thorns. That was not like someone just didn't go and make it in 5 minutes.
Right.
They would have had to have crafted that together. My guess is not a lot of people sitting there crafting crowns to put on people's heads. That was a mockery. So. That's someone that's ticked off or is trying to like make a joke out of this. You got to understand, this is a very callous time frame. There was like people laughed about this. They spit, mocked, and laughed about this kind of thing. I don't think that they would have taken the time out of their day to waste making a crown for somebody else. That just doesn't make sense to me. I get what you're saying, but we got to remember this isn't now where you can just order it on Amazon and wait 3 days. Like someone made this and they didn't have a lot of time to make it, because from the day that, for anyone that doesn't know, Jesus was imprisoned And basically the equivalent of the very short time frame, however many hours that was, he was found guilty. It was him and another man. The other man was a known killer, murderer. We're not going to say the other things he was known to do or potentially known to do, but very bad man. And they put both up. And what they would do is they would typically let one person go. And the crowd determined who they would let go. And basically, long story short, they show this known bad guy, and then they've got this guy that was in many occasions thought as blaspheming the Torah. And he said, "Who do you release?" And they go, "We want him. We want the bad guy, the murderer, the killer, because that guy's a blasphemer."
If they had chosen otherwise, would the Romans have let him go, do you think?
They would have had to have. They wouldn't have had a choice. The Romans didn't want to kill him.
Right.
Pilate,
I know.
Pilate said,
"Yeah, I wash my hands of this," or whatever.
Correct. He didn't care. Yeah. This was not this man got caught doing something. In fact, Pilate even said, "This is your people.
Yeah.
What do you choose?" And not to get all religious, but do you know why that is, Nick?
Why?
His wife had a dream, or almost like a vision, some would say. And she went to him before all this happened and was like, "You got to let this man go." She didn't know anything about it. Right. She's like, "You have a prisoner. You have to let this man go. I don't think you know who you have." And Pilate goes, "Woman, this is man stuff. Go away," basically. And when it all came, because, I mean, think about it. A blasphemer versus, we're going to let this murderer, this person that kills and steals and does all this stuff. Who would you rather be out in population? Because think about it. Back then, if you're a Roman and this guy's a blasphemer, you just stone him. You get him away from the site and everyone stones him to death.
Actually, the Romans wouldn't even give a flying frig about it because they're polytheistic. They don't believe in this stuff. You couldn't blaspheme against a polytheistic religion, because if you just didn't like the God they believed in, so what? Who cares? All of us believe in different ones.
Correct. But see, you got to think. Typically what would happen is you would be stoned to death by your own people when this would occur.
Right.
But in this case, they wanted Jesus to suffer. So they're like, what's the worst thing we can do? We'll have him crucified with everyone that's a bad people. And he's going to sit beside all them bad people. That's the importance of the story right there when you think about it.
Well, since we went into a little bit of the religious aspect of it, let me put it to you this way. I don't think that Pilate could have made a different decision. I don't think that Jesus' people could have made a different decision. I don't think Judas could have made a different decision, because this was all supposed to happen anyway. These people had no choice but to act in accordance to what they did. If the biblical part's true, these guys didn't have a choice. We can villainize them all we want, but they had to do this to end up where this was supposed to happen.
And for anyone that doesn't know, listen, again, we're not going to go heavy into the religious stuff, but if you want to read something extremely interesting, even if you don't believe in any of this stuff, go back into the Old Testament and read prophecy that occurred before the New Testament, and then watch this route, and it will freak you out. Even if you don't believe in any of this, like people get amazed by Nostradamus, right? With the
quatrains and the predictions. Yes. Yeah. Nostradamus.
Like everyone was like, that's amazing. This is the same equivalent. Like the things that's going to happen these next series of days was all foreseen in the very beginning of the Torah, or the Old Testament equivalent. And it's crazy. It's crazy to look at. But again, not for this podcast, but listen, if anyone's super curious, you can hit me up outside the podcast. I'll go into it and I'll tell you exactly where to look. But it's super interesting, if anything, from a history standpoint, because you're like, how the heck does it know this stuff? Very interesting. The next one is probably more along the lines of what kind of proofs you're looking for, Nick, is my
okay. I think it would have to be.
assumptions. There's a lot. There's a lot of these. I know one big one. This is probably one of the two. But are you ready to? This probably isn't the one you're looking for, but it's a close second one, I think.
Okay, let's hear it.
Are you ready to hear it?
I am ready.
Let's go. Listen, I told you at the beginning of this one, Mom, you can't be mad. You heard at the beginning of the episode, and I still gave you like a little over an hour and a half. Listen, you can't complain with that. Though I can tell you part 2 is going to be closer to like 2 hours because we are.
Oh yeah, like you can't get mad though. This is about Jesus. Like he's worth waiting for.
That's right.
Yeah.
What would Jesus do, Mom?
He'd wait for part 2.
Exactly. He'd wait for part 2. But listen, in part 2, we talked about some stuff that obviously I gave you that first little tidbit right there. Definitely interesting. The other stuff, listen, I got Nick with some stuff he didn't know about. And at the very end, you got to wait till the very end of part 2. I dropped something for everyone to kind of think about, to kind of, I think, full encompasses it and brings it around.
Yeah. It'll get your gears turning. I'll guarantee that.
Guaranteed. But hopefully you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, make sure you rate us no matter where you listen to your podcast at. Also, in your comments down below, tell us what's your favorite part of part 1. Is there something you don't think I'm going to cover in part 2? Let me know in the comments down below. I bet I do. Let's see how good you are at guessing.
Changed my life.
Until you see us in the next podcast, goodbye.
See you later.